Defendant texted me, phone works, and the emoji with the arrows going both ways. Clearly, after she left, the communication died down substantially, which makes sense because she was upset, which she would be upset if she threw herself at him and he rejected her. Women don't take that well, guys. So you're going to have conflict here between the two of them if he rejected her, which it appears he did. And I responded, I thought you were all set. So this clearly means that she said something along the lines of, I don't want to leave the relationship at this point. I just want to have sex. And when he said no, then we're all set. Either that or they created a plan that she was going to break up with John O'Keefe and come have a relationship with Brian Higgins. Although that would not come with bad feelings. That would be a plan where they would feel good. And so this sort of reaction here and him saying that she left is probably the latter, that she was rejected and she was pissed. So, and I responded, thought you were all set, reference to the in-person meeting. Defendant said, with talking, no. So again, now we have a reference. She wanted sex. She said, all set with talking? No. And then I said, are you sure? And she didn't respond. So we're just getting more and more indicators that we know what she wants. We know what he wants. We know that she's trying to blow up the relationship and that Higgins doesn't want to be in the middle of that. And that's preventing them from hooking up. Now, there's no messages until the well, that at the waterfall. So we have to understand what this means. Well, if there was actually no text messages between them, then this could be in response to the, are you sure? And she didn't respond because he said, let's see, defendant said with talking, no. And he said, are you sure? If this text message came immediately after this one, maybe a day later, that it would be in reference to this text message. But because it was 9 days later and in public, this seems like it's in reference to something else. So, and again, what is that text say there? And he says, well, so this is one in the waterfall. Thank you, sir. I'm just going to continue, sir, if I could. Couple more questions for you. Taking you back on the early morning of January 29th, when you had come from the waterfall to Fairview, and then you were leaving from Fairview, when you're pulling away from the residence, the period of time that you were talking about as far as the plow being down and the scraping a little bit on the ground. You recall that? He says, I do. About how much distance are we talking about with respect to that? And Higgins says, distance, less than, or less than a foot, I would say. I mean, it's real quick. I heard it. So bam, just we are right back into huge sensitivity here. He takes him right back into the incident and we go right back into the sensitivity. So what does this mean? I kind of ditched that. I don't know. We're gonna have to figure that out. But if there's missing texts here, those texts would show up on Karen Reed's phone. If he excised them, they would still exist. They would still be on Karen Reed's phone, but they would not be admissible in the trial. So we wouldn't actually know if there's anything there or not. And as you drove by the house that evening, where were you in relation to that part of the yard? When I drove away, yes. I might have been I was in the street. I pulled away. So that area would be on the passenger side. There's just huge sensitivity here. You know, we got repeating words. We've got all this stuff. So again, we've already covered this stuff. So I just put this in here to show you that as soon as they talk about it, the sensitivity comes right back. It's very predictable. Now we're jumping to Higgins's relationship with Ken Berkowitz, the police chief for the Canton Police Department. And during the course of that toast, you said, if you want to hide a body, Kenny Berkowitz is your man, right? It's as just a joke. It's just a joke. And Higgins says, I don't recall that. Well, come on. Denying this is a tactical mistake on Brian Higgins' part because he said that. That was clearly a really stupid thing to say. And it really came back to bite him. Now, it would definitely be said as a joke. I don't know who would get up and say that as a toast for somebody's retirement and say that seriously to a room full of cops. But the I don't recall that means that this statement is incriminating to me right now. And so I'm not going to admit to that. That should be common sense. And you would think that he would just say, yeah, I said that. An honest person, a truthful person would say, yes, I said that. Now, in hindsight, I see that was in hugely bad taste, but I did say that at the time, yes. So, but he's not willing to admit to that, which means there's an indicator of knowledge of guilt there. You don't remember telling that joke in front of a room full of folks? I don't. Oh, so we are in the cross-examination now. That's what this break is. So this is now Attorney Jackson that's asking the questions. You don't remember telling that joke in front of a room full of folks? I don't. Now, at first I thought, wow, that's an awfully direct lie. Like, it's contracted. And he says, I don't. But I realized immediately after that I don't is just half a sentence. And it's saying in his mind, he had just said, I don't recall that. And so in his mind, what he's doing is he's saying, I don't recall. He's just cutting off the recall part, because in here he says, you don't remember, and saying, I don't remember is too truthful to him. So saying, I don't recall after the question says, I don't remember, doesn't make a lot of sense. And so instead of saying, I don't remember or I don't recall, he just says, I don't. You'd say that you had both a social and professional working relationship with him. I would say, yes, he's a friend. So the social aspect of their friendship is not that great. So I would say, yes, he does consider him a friend, but he considers him a friend. He doesn't say, I don't consider him my friend. There's no increased sense of personal nature to their friendship. So he says, I consider him a friend. So there's a missing pronoun of my in here. Is it true that you testified? I mean, in 2 years, I mean, maybe under 50. So in this statement here, he's asking him, how many times has he gotten together and gotten drinks with Brian Albert over the last 2 years? And he says, I mean, in 2 years, I mean, maybe under 50. He's quoting Brian Higgins here. So he says, you testified to this, end quote. And that was your testimony to how often you socialized with Brian Albert. Correct. He says, so we socialized more when I started working with his unit. So they were socializing. When he first got to the unit. At some point, their relationship deteriorated. This is literally what he's telling you here. He said he uses we, and he says started. And he says, we used to get together a lot in the beginning and then not so much closer to the end here. And he says started twice, which is missing time. So there was an incident that happened where their socializing tapered off. It didn't die out. It clearly wasn't an incident that destroyed their friendship, but it definitely knocked it down a peg. There's a few questions in here about how good of friends are you with Brian Albert? And there's a lot of deception. It's clear to everybody, to Attorney Jackson. I mean, it's clear to everybody that Higgins is being obstinate. And then he says, okay, that's all I was getting at. Okay, that's fine. I mean, there's no secrets here, right? He's my friend. So he's my friend. He should have just stopped, because he shouldn't have tried to say there's no secrets here. It's okay to admit that someone is your friend. And he says, yeah, right. He's my friend. And he uses my, which means he does feel close to Brian Albert at this point. So they were good friends. Their friendship waned, right, for a period of time there, but now they're great friends again. But the interesting part of this is he says, there is no secrets here. There's a lot of secrets there. So moving on, he left Hillside and you stayed, correct? For a short time, yes. You later changed your mind and ultimately decided to go to the Waterfall. You finished whatever you're eating or drinking. You decided to go over to the Waterfall, right? Yes, because, so starting with an explanatory, I'm always saying I'm going to show up, and then I kind of do the Irish exit. Okay, so first off, this is rehearsed. This is irrelevant information, and he's using the phrase wrong. The Irish exit is when you're at a party and you just walk out and leave without telling anybody. But he's saying, I'm always saying I'm going to show up, but he doesn't show up. So he's using the phrase wrong. And then he says, so again, I decided it was a long day. So now he's misusing his rehearsed phrase. And remember, I told you he's really bad at using his rehearsed phrases. He either messes them up or he reduces commitment, which is the whole purpose of using a rehearsed phrase, is that you can say it without reducing your commitment. Or he just uses it wrong. Like, I decided it was a long day. I mean, you don't decide that. It either was or it wasn't. It was an emotional day. Now he's inserting emotion again. And I decided to join them. This is all extra information after the question is answered. So you decided to go over to the Waterfall, right? Yes. Boom. And question's answered. That's all he asked for. That's all he needed to say. Instead, we got a bunch of this extra stuff. Let's see. This is his rehearsed story. We'll just remember this for later. All right. So all this sensitivity and deception, this confirms for us. Yes. If you were wondering if it was a long day, if that's a rehearsed statement and it's going directly into a lie, the answer is yes. Yes, it is. What he's telling you is he decided to join them for a reason that he's not going to tell you. Was there any particular reason why you changed your mind and left the hillside to go to the Waterfall? Well, I think, as I previously testified, so reduction in commitment, and then this is deceptive. When somebody says, as I previously testified, that's referring to a previous deception, which makes it easier to be deceptive in the present. Because now it almost feels like you're referring to something truthful because you're referring to something that was in fact said, even though what was said wasn't truthful. I previously testified that it was because I didn't. Okay. So we go right into an explanatory plus a negative, that it was because I didn't always take them up on their offer. So that is not why he went there. And I usually did the Irish exit. Again, we got this rehearsed statement in here. And I decided because of the weather and everything else, and had been a long day, that I would go down there and join them. So the one thing that we know definitively is that none of this is true. So why did he go there? It was either for Karen Reed or it was for John O'Keefe, because he didn't go there just to hang out. That's the one thing that we do know. So we have a lie here. This leads me to believe that Brian Higgins talked to Brian Albert at the hillside about conflict with John O'Keefe. So it's my theory at this point. Feel free to add in, leave comments in the comments. Tell me if I don't have all the information or whatnot. But based on the verbiage that I'm seeing here, it's my belief that John O'Keefe became aware of the text messages between Karen Reed and Brian Higgins and confronted Brian Higgins either via text message or in person. I think it was via text message, which is what Brian Higgins excised out of his phone. John O'Keefe probably said something along the lines of, the next time we see each other, we're going to meet out in the parking lot or something like that. I don't know. But there's a lot of evidence and a lot of verbiage that indicates that John O'Keefe and Brian Higgins had a beef to settle. So I think that's the reason why. I think actually he went because John O'Keefe wasn't there. I think he knew that there was a beef to settle. And he was waiting for Brian Albert to get there and text back and say, yeah, he's not here. Go ahead and come hang out. So didn't have anything to do with knowing Karen Reed might be at the waterfall. It couldn't have, because I didn't know she or John O'Keefe would even be there. I didn't know who's going to be there other than Brian's wife. Okay, let's just look at this statement for what it is. Notice every word is highlighted. This is a negative plus an explanatory plus a negative plus a negative. Ouch. I couldn't have, because I didn't know she or John O'Keefe would even be there. I didn't know who's going to be there other than Brian's wife. So we have 3 negative statements. Confirmation that Brian Higgins was waiting for confirmation from Brian Albert that they were not there. Do you have any text messages with Brian about going to the waterfall? He says, I don't recall. Ooh, there we go. This is a deception tag. So we have definitive confirmation here that there are text messages between him and Brian about going to the waterfall. And then he says, he told me about it at the hillside. Yeah, he did tell him about it at the hillside, but he means why he ended up going to the hillside after Brian had already got there. And that was part of what he did excise out of his phone. This is a deception tag in a text string that Brian Higgins removed from his phone. Deduction. Brian Higgins told Brian Albert about conflict with John O'Keefe over Karen Reed that developed after the in-person meeting at Brian Albert's house. So the fact that Attorney Jackson keeps bringing up these text messages and this conflict, it indicates to me that he has knowledge of this, of stuff that's not admissible. And he's trying to fish out a statement that's going to make stuff admissible here. So that's what we are looking for here. But the bottom line here is that we have the I don't recall, which tells you that he did have text messages from Brian that he took out of his phone. And the fact that he took them out of his phone means that they were about John O'Keefe, because otherwise, why would he remove them from his phone? If he said, I'm only going there if they're serving whiskey, I want you to go there, find out if they're out of whiskey. And then Brian texts back, they've got whiskey, come on over. If that's what he was waiting for, he wouldn't have excised that out of his phone. So the fact that it was excised, this conversation, to me, it tells me that it was about John O'Keefe, because even if it was about Karen Reed, who cares? We already know the text that went between Higgins and Reed. So who cares if we find out that he had talked to Albert about it? Who cares? So the only thing this could be about would be John O'Keefe. That's the only thing that would be incriminating enough to the point where you would go to that extent to excise those out and then destroy your phone. So any text communication between you and Brian Albert about who was at the waterfall or who was expected to come to the waterfall. All right. So Attorney Jackson knows. He knows that he was waiting for confirmation that John O'Keefe wasn't there. And he says, no, not that I recall. Perfect. Deception tag that verifies for us that that is actually the reason why. No, you've already indicated, and I don't think we need to go into a lot more detail on this, but I want to ask you just in general, the mood at the waterfall was in good spirits, correct? It was great. Band was playing. This rehearsed statement is getting weird. Okay. Why do we keep hearing this so much? Tahiti is a magical place. Tell me in the comments if you know what that's from. It's a phrase that is repeated over and over again. And it becomes weird in the show. And it's exactly how it feels like when they say the band was playing. It was great. There was a band playing. Let's see. It did not see any sort of tension between John O'Keefe and Karen. I did not. So uncontracted denial. This is a favorite for Brian Higgins. This is also a deception tag. So we know that he did see tension between John and Karen. All right. So this could have been used to Higgins' favor. He didn't realize it in this moment, but if there was tension between John and Karen, that would play towards motive for Karen Reed to hit John O'Keefe with her car. And we already know that Higgins is going to jump all over any opportunity that he has to try and show Karen Reed did this. So he didn't realize that here. So what was in his mind here? You did not see any sort of tension between John O'Keefe and Karen. And he says, I did not, which means he did see tension between them, but he knows that Karen Reed didn't kill John O'Keefe. So the tension that was between them, it did not register in his mind as being motive for her because he knows how John O'Keefe died because he killed him. Higgins is trying to paint a picture here where everyone is happy because he thinks that if there's any fighting between them, it's going to be about him. And he doesn't want any conflicts between himself and John O'Keefe to become aware to the jury or to you and me, but actually to the jury. Thus, we have an uncontracted denial and we have deception here. He says, nobody seems overly intoxicated. No. Well, this is funny because he was really trying to insinuate that Karen Reed was overly intoxicated. He was trying to build up a case against Karen Reed earlier. But now we've already covered the murder. And so Higgins is stuck in this mindset where he knows the outcome of the evening and he knows that Karen Reed wasn't a part of it. And so it doesn't occur to him at this point to try to incriminate her. He's more set on trying to not incriminate himself than to try to incriminate her. Again, that's because when we saw him building motive before, we hadn't covered John O'Keefe's death yet. And so Higgins has walked through this from before his death to now we are after his death, and we have gone back to before his death again, but we have already gone past it once in this testimony here. And so he's not going to be able to put himself all the way back into that mindset again because John O'Keefe has died while he was on the witness stand. So let's see. Nobody seemed overly intoxicated. No. When John walked into the waterfall, were you already there? Yes. Karen walked in with him. Yes. But she did not greet you, did she? I think they kind of went like in different directions. Evasion, right? This is deception. She may have greeted him or Brian Higgins didn't want to look bad. But we got to figure out the options, okay? Once we figure out deception, we got to ask ourselves, why? Why is he being deceptive about this? So did she greet you or did she not greet you? And it would be really easy for him to say, nope, she didn't say a word to me. That's it. That'd be a perfectly straight up legitimate answer to the question. But instead he becomes evasive here, which tells me that she did greet him. He can't say no and he's being evasive. That is what this means, is she did greet him. Now we have a lot of evidence to the contrary. So let's keep this in mind and see if all of this evidence that we have could be wrong. Did she actually greet him while he was there? Because that's what the verbiage is telling us. So did she greet you? No. Right. So she walked over towards the corner of the bar and John came over and greeted you and then walked over and joined her, correct? Yes. Karen didn't stop what she was doing when she was over in the corner of the bar and come over and say hi to you. He says, I didn't have any interaction with her that night. No. Now he's choosing his words carefully here. He didn't have any interaction with her. And this interaction is in reference to this interaction here is in reference to the question, which is Karen didn't stop what she was doing and come over. And so he says, no interaction. Now, she basically ignored you the entire evening. So he uses the word ignored. She ignored you the entire evening. And he says, that's not how I interpreted it. No, that's interesting. Let's look at this for deception. It seems like he's not answering the question or that it's evasive or what is this telling us here? Let's see. The question is, she basically ignored you the entire evening. That's not how I interpreted it. So he uses he uses past tense and interpreted it is active voice. We don't have any repeating words here. We have no sign of deception here. So that's not how I interpreted it. No. By my own rules, I have to label this as a truthful statement. Now, we also want to pay attention to the verbiage, interpret. He didn't interpret it like that. So he's not saying that she came over and talked to him. What he is saying, Higgins is saying, is that her not talking to him wasn't ignoring him. So how does this all fit together? Well, nobody seems to be talking about eye contact. If you've ever flirted with anyone in your life, or had any sort of a relationship with someone that everybody in the room wasn't aware of, you make eye contact. There's a lot of ways of communicating with somebody, coming from me, right? The deception detection expert. There are a lot more ways other than verbal that you can communicate with people. Body language, and we talk about linguistics, like tone of voice. But, and this is funny, I always tell my wife, don't look at me in that tone of voice. But, and that's a joke, but it is actually true. It's actually a real statement. Like when you look at somebody, you can glare at them, or you can look at them lovingly, or you can have a 1,000-yard stare like you're going to kill somebody. There's a lot of ways that you can look at somebody. And so what Higgins is telling you here, she may have greeted him. She did. She gave him, they made eye contact. That's why this was evasive here. You're seeing reaffirmation of that here. That's not how I interpreted it. So they did communicate, even though they were across the room. I didn't ask you how you interpreted it. I asked you what she did. Did she ignore you, or did she pay attention to you? And he says, no, this is a compound question, so it's problematic. So he says, did she ignore you, or did she pay attention to you? It's problematic because he starts to say, no, she didn't ignore me, or no, she didn't pay attention to me. And now we don't realize what question he's answering here. So Attorney Jackson says, so she paid attention to you, came over and said hello, shook your hand, gave you a hug. And then Higgins says, well, just because somebody didn't come over doesn't mean they ignored you. So interesting. He is being deceptive here. Now, this is a explanatory statement with a negative statement. But what he's doing is he is underhandedly telling you the truth. What he's literally saying is she didn't come over, but that doesn't mean that she didn't communicate. And that is truthful, but he's not telling you that we made eye contact. So he is insinuating the communication, and he's phrasing it in a very deceptive way. So keep in mind here that the deception is that he's not telling you that they made eye contact. He's telling you that they made eye contact without telling you that. And that's why there's deception. Originally, I thought Brian Higgins was being difficult here, but he's actually saying they made eye contact. Brian Higgins won't allow the ignored comment because they had some inside communication. It's like you didn't even need to exist. I think that's dramatic. That's what Higgins says. And then he says, no, I don't look at it that way. So there's huge sensitivity here because Higgins, in his mind, he desperately wants to say, we made eye contact and communicated probably in a far more meaningful way than anybody who went around shaking people's hands and hugging. But he's not going to say that because that incriminates him, or that's going to open up a whole new line of questioning here. He's trying to be disagreeable, but at the same time, he's trying to not incriminate himself. So he's showing deception while he is subtextually giving you the truth. Did she ignore you or not? Now, because Brian Higgins is not allowing this, he's not saying she ignored me. He's saying we had communication, but he's being deceptive about it. So he's going to get the question over and over again. And he says, no, she did not ignore me. Oh, okay. So he finally broke and he says, she did not ignore me. Now you're saying, okay, but that's an uncontracted denial and that's deception, which means she did ignore him. No, because, and we covered this at great length in another video, a uncontracted denial is deceptive when it's the first time that it's asked. Because when you re-ask the same question, when you make the same accusation multiple times, that person's anger level increases. And eventually that contraction will become uncontracted as they're trying to forcefully tell you. So if you take an innocent person and you say, did you kill her? That person will say, no, I didn't kill her. Then you say, I don't believe you. You're a liar and a murderer. Did you kill her? They'll say, no, I did not kill her. They will uncontract that to make it a forceful denial. It's deceptive the first time because there's no reason for a truthful person to be that forceful right off the bat. They're truthful. They know the truth. They believe that if you hear the truth, you'll believe it because it's the truth. And so here we have the word ignore, and I believe that I bolded it up here so that we could find it again quickly. Ignore. So this is not the first time that he's been accused of being ignored. And so the uncontracted denial at this point makes sense. He says, no, she did not ignore me. And that's the truth, right? So one person, she didn't come over and talk to you and say hello to catch up with you. He says, I don't know that I was the only person, but I was one of the people that she didn't say hello to. Yes. So now we have missing time here, which is the eye contact that he's not telling you about. And the rest of this is he's agreeing like, yeah, I don't know that I'm not the only person in the bar that she didn't say hello to, but she didn't say hello to me. Yes, that's correct. present tense, she treated you sort of like a stranger. And he says, I don't feel that way. No, this is a truthful statement. Did that upset you that she ignored you or didn't pay attention to you? Okay. You got to ask yourself at this point, why is he asking the question this many times? What kind of a response is he trying to elicit? And so let's keep that in mind. I did not feel ignored and didn't upset me at all. So he stumbles over his words here, but he basically says, I did not feel ignored. Now we have the uncontracted denial here because the word ignored has been repeated so many times that the uncontraction is okay. And then he says didn't. So he recontracts it here to say upset him. So again, this is all indicators of truthfulness for us. And so I'm going to believe him when he is truthful. So he did not feel ignored and he didn't get upset. It didn't upset me at all. He wasn't upset by that. And that's because they were making eye contact from across the room. They were communicating in their own way. But it bothered you enough to send her a text, didn't it? And he says, no, it was a flirtatious text. It was just, that was it. So he can't say it's flirtatious because it wasn't a flirtatious text. So he starts to stumble on his words. Now we're getting away from the honest statements. It was just, that was it. And so it wasn't flirtatious. There was information that he wanted. And to get that answer, he would have been fine getting that answer through eye contact. I don't know whether he got an answer to the well or not, because we don't really know what that was about. It bothered you enough to send her a text that said, with 6 M's behind it. And he says, okay. And well, correct. Well, it wasn't like that. It was, well, that's it. You meant, well, when are you going to pay attention to me? And Higgins says, no, that's not correct. Again, now this is a truthful statement. No, that's not correct. That's contracted. And he's telling him in the present tense that what he just said is not correct. Paying attention to him was not the issue. It was something else. That well had to have something to do with John O'Keefe. Like, well, what's the status? Is he aware of us or not? Did you break up with him or not? It has to do with John O'Keefe, not with her paying attention to him. And he's looking for some sort of indication that either her relationship with him was resolved, but because she never went and talked to him, it doesn't seem like that. And so to me, it seems like he's saying, is John O'Keefe aware? Like, did he go through your text messages? Is that why there's been radio silence here? And then when you texted her, well, at the waterfall, she ignored that text to correct. Well, that was the only text I sent that night to her. Yes. Did she ignore the text, Mr. Higgins? And he says, I don't know. So I don't know now is just, it's a different way of telling you that he communicated with her in a different way. This is missing time. So I don't know means that there was an action that he's not telling you. And that action is nonverbal communication. It's technically not possible to not know the answer to that question. So did she ignore the text? So when he says, I don't know if she ignored it or not, you know right off the bat, that's not a truthful statement because she either ignored it or she didn't. Because ignore it means you either addressed it or you didn't. And she either did that or she didn't. And so Higgins knows that. So the missing information here means glances. It means nonverbal communication. Did she respond to the text? She did not respond. All right. So meaning she didn't text back, but the uncontracted denial here means she did respond, but she didn't text. So again, we have, you gotta be right in the verbiage here in order to understand what's going on in his mind and why his mind is picking these words. So she did not respond is a lie. She did respond, but there's no text message. So when everybody was leaving, did you leave before they did? John and Karen, or did they leave before you did? And he says, I don't know. It is technically possible to not know this, but extremely unlikely. I believe this to be missing time, meaning they must have had some sort of nonverbal communication about this. So there was a time in the bar when people were deciding whether or not they're going to go to the pizza place, whether or not they're going to go back to the house. And there was some sort of nonverbal communication between Higgins and Reed to not go back there. And Reed ends up saying that she was trying to tell John O'Keefe, we weren't invited. Let's not go there. And it seems like Higgins was telling Reed nonverbally, listen, I'm going with them. And you guys don't come. No, you can't see my hand, but it would be easy for him to go, I'm going, you guys don't go. Like, that communication is not difficult. People do that all the time. And so there was definitely some sort of missing time, missing information here about who was going where and when. And there was definitely communication between Higgins and Reed.